All right. So in the previous lecture, we talked about the formation of Khilafat movement, the reasons for the formation of Khilafat movement. For example, I'm going to just go over these reasons one by one. The protection of caliphate, protection of holy places, reminding British of the promises, protection of the splitting of Ottoman Empire, protection of the splitting of Turkey from these British policies, arrest of their leaders such as Ali brothers, and obviously the Indians wanted to showcase their resentment upon these reforms that were being introduced previously before the Khilafat movement, before 1920. So a lot of incidents took place as part of this Khilafat movement. We did go through these incidents in class yesterday. The notes are there on the drive. You can go through these notes. All of the incidents are elaborated in detail. The Hijra movement, we've already covered that. The Chora Chori incident, the non-cooperation movement by Gandhi, and obviously the Khilafat conferences. All India Khilafat conferences were basically delegations that used to visit England and they used to present their demands in front of the British. So these were all the major events. Now, the outcome of this, the Khilafat movement, was it a failure? Was it successful? Um, Generally, Khilafat movement's main purpose wasn't fulfilled. It was, if we look at the major reasons, if I were to ask you guys to tell me any three major reasons for the formation of Khilafat movement. So the first one would be protection of the Caliph, because protection of Khilafat was the main reason for the formation of this movement. The Muslims wanted to protect their Caliph in Turkey. Secondly, protection of holy places. And thirdly, the protection of the Ottoman Empire. Muslims wanted to protect the Ottoman Empire because most of the Islamic territories were under that empire at that time. And obviously, British and French, they were annexing these lands as part of their policies after World War One. This is what they did with with Germany and Austria. So Muslims had a fear that they might carry out such cruel. They might implement such policies against Ottoman Empire as well. So these were the three major reasons for the formation of Khilafat movement out of all these 7 to 8 reasons that we have done. And if you focus, if you look at the events of history, the Caliph was removed, Khilafat was abolished, um, even the Ottoman Empire was split up. You can even look at the maps post World War One and pre World War One maps of Ottoman Empire. So now we come to believe that if most of the reasons that were the major reasons for the formation of Khilafat movement weren't, they failed. The purpose failed. So there was no point on carrying on with this movement. So we can say that the movement itself was a failure because whatever the Muslims were trying to achieve, they couldn't. Even there was a point when Hindus they withdrew their support because Gandhi felt as if his non-cooperation movement, his civil disobedience movement, had caused a lot of violence in India. And obviously, that was straining the Muslim Hindu relations as well, British Hindu relations as well. This was one of the reasons as to why Gandhi withdrew his support. So now we're going to be analyzing the reasons, the causes for the failure of Khilafat movement. In form of 14-mark question here, you should know 7 reasons for the failure. And the question here says that was the withdrawal of Gandhi the most important cause of the failure of Khilafat movement? So they've given us one reason, that is the withdrawal of Gandhi's support. And we're going to be discussing this reason on level 3, first of all, and then 6 other reasons on level 4. So let's talk about the withdrawal of Gandhi and how did this particular reason cause the Khilafat movement to fail. If you look at the notes here, Gandhi had also joined the Khilafat movement to support Muslims and to put pressure over British. Hindu Muslim majority jointly run the movement with full zeal. Okay, so initially Muslims had started this movement, but Hindus also joined the Muslims for several different reasons. Because obviously, one of the reasons was Hindus wanted to pressurize British for more reforms. They were disappointed because of the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy, Amritsar massacre in 1920, the 1919 Montfort reforms. So they were a bit disappointed. And this is why Hindus also joined Muslims to pressurize British for more reforms that informed the Khilafat movement. However, when the incident of Chora Chori took place, which resulted in the death of 21 policemen, Gandhi withdrew from the movement as he did not support violent activities. The withdrawal of Gandhi weakened the Khilafat movement as Hindu, the major part of the movement, had left. So, because of the violent activities that were taking place, and this Chora Chori incident was basically when when the Indians, attacked on the British. They killed them, and because British was started imprisoning the Indians as a result of the non-cooperation movement by Gandhi. So all the sole reason behind the violence, these violent activities in India, was the civil disobedience movement by Gandhi. When he saw that this movement had caused violence in India, he immediately called off the movement and withdrew the support from Khilafat movement as well. This was a major blow for the Muslims because Hindus are a major part of the Indian community at that time, right? So if this I mean, withdrawal of this support meant that Muslims were now outnumbered by the British. They didn't have enough, you could say, numerical strength to carry on this movement. Hijrat movement was another reason for the failure of Khilafat movement. Hijrat movement, if you remember, was when Muslims migrated to Afghanistan, and the Afghan government didn't allow the Muslims to enter in the territory. So what happened was, because the Muslims had left everything, their properties, uh, their belongings, and everything was left behind in India, and they migrated without anything. They had to come back, and they had to face the severe economic crisis because of that. And now this was another reason the Muslims too, I mean, they had to shape themselves up. They had to focus on these more important problems as social and economic crisis that they had to face right after the Hijrat movement, the failed Hijrat movement. So their interests changed, their focus, their attention from the Khilafat movement was actually shifted onto this. I mean, they wanted to set themselves up again. So they were demoralized, and it somehow broke the momentum of the Khilafat. This is what the analysis says. If you just read the bold lines here, they lost what they had left for migration. When they came back to India, they faced social and economic miseries. This demoralized them and broke the momentum of the Khilafat movement. So this is the effect. This is how the failed Hijrat movement caused the Khilafat movement to fail. Third point is the lack of unity. Lack of unity between the Muslims and the Hindus and within the Muslims themselves. So the Muslim leaders, they couldn't unite the Muslims under one common objective. People uprose for different reasons. Hindus wanted to pressurize British for more concessions. Muslims wanted to protect their Khalifa. So now they had different reasons for this movement. There was no common goal. This is another reason as to why the movement failed, because there was lack of unity. Okay, lack of leadership. As we studied a point in the formation of Khilafat movement, arrest of famous leaders like Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar, Maulana Shaukat Ali Johar. So the Ali brothers and other main leaders were arrested as a result of these the activities carried out by the British. They were trying to obviously oppress these voices through force. After the leaders got arrested, there was no leader to actually lead the Muslims. There was no one to guide them for the movement further. This was another reason as to why the movement failed. Different objectives. Now, this point is similar to the lack of unity point, because some of the Muslims were fighting to protect the Ottoman Empire. Most of the Hindus were fighting for the self-rule movement, because if you remember, these movements such as Arya Samaj and the self-rule movements were planted for the nationalism. They were launched by the Hindus to unite the Hindu community for the self-rule movements, to have this sort of you could say these idea of nationalism. So the self-rule was an objective for the Hindus to take part in the Khilafat movement. The major aim was again faded. Muslims were fighting for the Ottoman Empire. Hindus wanted self-rule. There was no common objective again, and the basis of the Khilafat movement was not strong again. Moplas uprising, this was another event that took place. What happened was, Moplas are the Arab Muslims that lived in Madras at that time. They had, I mean, these Muslims used to, I mean, they were oppressed under cruel Hindu landlords who imposed heavy taxation on the Muslims. They used to, annex their lands illegally, impose heavy taxes. So they were really oppressed under these policies of the Hindu landlords. They uprose because of that, and that uprising caused violence and bloodshed in Madras. This affected the Hindu-Muslim relations, and this was another reason as to why the Hindu-Muslim unity was affected. Hindu-Muslim unity was very important for this Khilafat movement because both of the communities, we have seen them, I mean, for this was one of the very few instances when we see the Hindu and Muslim communities together fighting for one common objective. If you focus on the other events in history, Lucknow Pact was one of the examples. Opposition to monumental reforms, opposition to Montfort reforms are other examples. Khilafat movement, this formation of Khilafat movement is itself a very important example of Hindu-Muslim unity. This was one of the very few times when both of the communities got together to uprise against the British for one common objective. But these events such as the Mopla uprisings, the self-rule movements, the non-cooperation movements, all of these events caused the unity to basically end. And this was another reason as to why the Khilafat movement failed, because the bases were now very weak. Hindus and the Muslims were fighting for different reasons, different causes there. And the last, probably the most important reason for the failure of Khilafat movement was the abolishment of the Khilafat. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was the leader of, he was the caliph and he was overthrown. This system of Khilafat was abolished. And this, because this was one of the, or the main reason for the formation of Khilafat movement, because the Khilafat was now abolished, there was no purpose to carry out this movement anymore. So this is another reason as to why the Khilafat movement failed. Guys, is there any confusion? We've studied 7 reasons for the failure of the movement. Anything that's not clear? Any questions? Or any point that you would want to add over here? No? Everything clear? So here's an open question for all of you. What do you think out of all these reasons? Let me just give you a quick recap, first of all, for the reasons for the failure of Khilafat movement. Listen to these reasons very carefully. Number 1, withdrawal of Gandhi, Hijra movement, lack of unity, lack of leadership, the different objectives, Mopla's uprising, and the abolishment of caliphate. What do you guys think? Out of all these reasons, which reason was the most important one for the failure of Khilafat?
So can I answer?
Yes, sure.
So when the Hindus left the support and when Gandhi just left out of the movement.
So you think that was the most important reason? How would you justify that? I mean, how would you explain this?
So because when both were, when Muslims and Hindus were together, they were fighting and they were strong.
All right.
Because of Hindu were in majority and Muslims were not in majority, so they were like a team. But when Hindus left, so Muslims were weak and they don't have a proper people who can just
Support
because of the Gandhi
system,
support, the support, and because of the Gandhi, they were leading. But after the when Gandhi left, they were all like separated and they don't want to just move ahead.
Right. So what I understand from your point is that you're trying to say Gandhi being a very influential leader of the subcontinent at that time, and Hindus being in majority were a very strong support system for the Muslims. Because Muslims were in minority, they needed that strong support from a majority, from a community in majority, and from an influential leader like Gandhi to carry out this movement. And once the support was over, it was difficult for the Muslims to carry out this movement, right?
Yes.
All right. What about you guys, Habiba and Ahmed? What do you think? Was this the most important reason, or was it any other reason the most important one?
Yeah, the most important reason was because Gandhi left. Because once he left, then the Hindus left, and therefore there was no longer unity between the Muslims and the Hindus. That was important because the Hindus were in majority, so the membership of the movement like decreased, and so therefore they weren't able to pressurize the British anymore.
All right. Okay. So you're talking about the Hindu-Muslim unity primarily. Uh, and so you're saying that withdrawal of Gandhi hurted the Hindu-Muslim unity as well, because Muslims were expecting the Hindus to stand side by side throughout this movement, and this didn't happen. All right, that's fair enough. Would you like to add anything, Habiba? No. All right. So guys, because you'll be asked to write an evaluation for the 14-mark question. So your evaluation will be a judgment, a strong judgment regarding the reason that you think was the most important for the failure of Khilafat movement. You guys have given pretty good explanations there. So even if you write all of what you've said, I think that's going to be a good evaluation for this answer. Your evaluatory paragraph should be of 6 to 7 lines, maybe roughly on average, but you should definitely tell that, I mean, whatever you think was the most important reason, and then explain that in a few lines with proper evaluations and justifications. That is how you're going to get this 1 mark for the evaluations. Do not give your judgments in the beginning. Whenever you start writing 14-mark questions, just don't tell your judgment over there. All right. Just stay neutral throughout the question. Mention the reason that's already written in the question on level 3. For example, withdrawal of Gandhi support here. This is how they've also, I mean, if you look at these notes, they've also written this reason as the first one. And then all of the other 6 reasons, and then 1 evaluatory paragraph to close the answer. This is the proper method to solve this question. Okay. Now, let's evaluate the successes and the failures. So Khilafat movement itself failed because some of its objectives failed, but it had some successes as well. The impacts. We're not talking about why the movement failed. Now we're talking about the consequences of this movement. Okay. This is the difference between these two questions that we're doing here. So there were some positive points as well. There were some positive impacts, and obviously there were some failed consequences as well. So let's talk about the successes. How successful was the Khilafat movement? This is another type 14-mark question. You will either be writing 4 successes or 3 failures, or 3 successes or 4 failures. Because Khilafat movement was mostly a failure, so I'd recommend you guys to go for 4 failures and 3 successes. And you can start off your question by writing maybe 3 successes, and then on level 4 you can talk about the 4 failures. Let's read this question here as well. How successful was the Khilafat movement? Okay, before all of this, I want you guys to comment on this. What do you guys think? Any one point, maybe from each one of you, what were the successes of this movement? What do you guys think were the Muslims able to achieve after this?
So one of the successes was Muslim-Hindu unity.
Muslim-Hindu unity. Okay. Anything else?
And the first time that Muslims and Hindus had been together against the British.
Not the first time, but yeah, after Lucknow Pact maybe, or the Montfort reforms after quite some time. Yeah.
But yeah, not the first time, but like one of the.
It
was quite rare.
I mean, yeah, that was quite rare, exactly. And it was very important because Khilafat movement was a very large scale movement, and seeing Muslims and Hindus together in such a movement was actually very important for the Muslims, for the progress of these communities in India. All right. Anything else?
That they got to know if Hindus would leave them, they have to fight for their own self. That they should be strong enough that they should fight for themselves. Because if any party would leave them, then they would be left out. And how could they gather themselves again and then stand up and fight for themselves?
Exactly. They should be strong enough without the support of any other political party or community of the subcontinent. This was one of the lessons the Muslims learned through this movement. They were expecting the Hindu support to be there throughout this movement, but it didn't happen. So they realized that in order to sustain a movement of this scale, it was important for them to have an organized foundation. They shouldn't be relying on such a community to be with them forever. So yeah, that's another important point here. And you'll see such examples throughout the Pakistan movement as well. Once we talk about the events post 1930 or 1940 till 1947, you'll see how the Muslims will gradually understand that they would have to somehow be independent, in a sense that they won't have to rely on any other community to support them in any movement, let's say Pakistan movement for that case, and they'll have to sustain these movements on their own. This was, I mean, all of these lessons, they started through this Khilafat movement, and they'll be there throughout the Pakistan movement as well. Very important point. Okay, so failures now. What were the failed consequences or failures that the communities had to? We're not just talking about the Muslims here. Maybe for Hindus, for British. So any community in India at that time. What do you guys think were the failures that they had to face as a result of this movement?
They failed to protect the caliphate from being abolished, which was its main goal.
Yeah, Khilafat was abolished. Okay.
Many of the people lost their properties from the Hijra movement.
Exactly. The Hijra movement, Muslims had actually miscalculated the consequences. They thought that the Afghani government would welcome them, but turned out that they had to face these severe consequences. And that failed Hijra movement further caused the Khilafat movement to fail. So it had such major consequences. Yeah, a very important point. All right, let's look at the structure of this answer now. Number one, the British-Muslim relations. Guys, we talk about the Hindu-Muslim relations, but because Muslims had organized such a large-scale movement against the British, they were all the time they were trying to tell the British that you had made promises to us, and they were trying to tell them that British were to fulfill those promises. They were convincing them to not break the Ottoman Empire, to protect the Caliph, and they were carrying out these large-scale uprisings against them as well, in form of the civil disobedience movements. The relations between the Muslims and the British were strained as well. Yeah. Number two, Muslims had realized that they should, without the support of any other party, the point that Amna was telling right now, that they themselves were a very strong political power and they had to fight for their own rights. Hindus are not concerned. They were not concerned with what the Muslims demanded. They were there for this Khilafat movement in the first place, just for the self-rule movement. Yeah, they had their own goals. Muslims, they misunderstood the objective of Hindus. They thought that they were just there for this loyalty, for the sake of loyalty, and they were just supporting Muslims. No, but that wasn't the case. Okay, have we done the 3 points? No. Okay, yeah, the third point was that there was another lesson that they had to be prepared to face future situations such as the Khilafat movement, because once you study the events after Khilafat movement regarding the formation of Pakistan movement and the Pakistan movement itself, you'll see how the Muslims implemented these lessons in all the future movements, right? So they had so much to learn from the Khilafat movement that they were prepared, they were ready to base their future movements upon the lessons they had learned from the Khilafat movement and the failures there. Muslim leaders got this experience of running and maintaining such a large-scale movement. They finally, this was very rare that Muslims were finally uprising against the British. We saw such level of uprising in 1857 during the War of Independence. And then we saw these small oppositions against the British reforms in 1909 for the more Lemento reforms, in 1919 for the Montfort reforms. But we haven't seen such a large-scale movement since the War of Independence of 1857. This was the first time ever after 1857 that we saw such a large-scale movement to actually voice their concerns against the British policy, the tyrannical British rule. Yeah. So this was another point that basically served as an experience for the Muslim leaders to run such a large-scale movement. And the negative consequences were that they wanted to protect the Khilafat system, and that Khilafat system was abolished, and they were not successful in basically achieving the main objective of the Khilafat movement. Hindu-Muslim relations were strained. Um, I mean, obviously, because the Muslims had expected the Hindus to be there on their side for the throughout the entire movement, and but the Hindus, they were just concerned about their own image. When Gandhi saw that the violence grew in the subcontinent, he immediately called up the non-cooperation movement, without even thinking the blow that it would have on the Khilafat movement. British-Muslim relations were strained as well because they were opposing. The Muslims were constantly opposing the British. British retaliated and imprisoned these prominent Muslim leaders. So it also affected the peace and stability of the subcontinent alongside the relations between the Muslims and the British. Yeah. So that is it. These were the consequences of the Khilafat movement. Guys, we're done with this topic. Now, what we need to do is a class assignment here. I want you guys to attempt this question. The withdrawal of Gandhi, the most important cause of the failure of Khilafat movement. Explain your answer. Regarding the question, I just received Ahmed's answer. Habiba, your answer was missing. So please try to just get done with that, with the assignment today, okay? And you guys can submit this work to me. I would recommend that we still have some time left in class. So I'd recommend you guys to start working on this assignment right now, the 15 minutes that we have for this task. And then you can complete the remaining assignment as in maybe a homework and then submit it to me by, guys, should I set the time as 10 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time? Is 10 p.m. fine for everyone?
I think it'll be fine, but if not, I'll send it to you tomorrow.
It's tomorrow.
If I haven't got it done by 10.
Okay, but we try to get it done before 10, okay?
Okay.
Amna and Habiba, what do you guys say? Is 10 p.m. fine for you as well?
So can you make it to 11 because I will be having my tuition.
All right, 11.
7:30.
All right.
Or I would complete.
How about we just extend the deadline to tomorrow then, so it's easier for you guys to submit it.
Okay.
Habiba, are you also fine? Tomorrow, guys, anytime before 12 p.m. tomorrow. Okay. 12 p.m. in the noon. So because I need some time to even go through your answers before the class tomorrow, right? Because I'll obviously want to give you guys feedback on these answers. Evaluations are not there in these notes. So evaluation is what you guys will be writing on your own. The notes are there on the drive. I'll again recommend you guys to study the notes before attempting, but don't copy these answers down. Your answers will be different because your justifications, your point of views will differ from these, from what the content in the notes are, right? So just try to come up with your own answers. Do not just rely on these notes. They're just there for your guide. And evaluations, obviously there is no evaluation in the notes, so that's completely on your own. Please write good evaluations. I'll specifically be checking those because that is one of the most important points. And then the analysis, how you analyze each point, because these notes, they just give you the explanations. They don't give you the analysis that you write, and most of the marks in an history exam are on the analysis. All right. Even if you just go through a textbook or you go through certain notes, you won't know how to analyze a question unless you think about it critically. You analyze your the contents very properly. I mean, maybe you could have a discussion with other fellow students, with your teacher, and then come up with proper analysis. So I want you guys to write proper analysis for each point and then evaluation at the end, and submit the answers to me by noon tomorrow, 12 p.m. so I can go over these and give you guys timely feedback before tomorrow's class. All right. We will be studying geography tomorrow, 5:45 p.m. again. All right. Please be sure to send in your answers before the class tomorrow. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow then. Allah Hafiz.